start out, I wanted to welcome students, advancement board members who are on, Clemson faculty, and our guest, John McNellis. Welcome to our Thursday Bull session. Thank you, Amy, for organizing this for us too. It's always great to see everybody as best we can with the conditions we're in. I'm Dave Chandler. I'm the Clemson Advancement Board Chair. The Clemson board consists of 40 real estate professionals. We're a diverse group, and now many of our members are actually MRED students too, that are now currently giving back to Clemson. So that's great to see. So I want to thank the board members who are on, and thank you for supporting the program. I enjoyed seeing students a few weeks ago in Charlotte, and what I saw was that many of those great tours were actually organized by students, and they were recent Clemson graduates actually. And what I saw was how quickly you can really progress from being in the classroom to becoming a real estate professional, and more importantly, getting back to getting a paycheck. So that's really what I saw when you were here in Charlotte, and you saw a lot of students that were really doing a great job in their careers here in Charlotte. The Advancement Board wishes all of you success. We wish you first success in completing your classroom projects, and I know you're finishing up in the next week or two. We wish you well on that, and we also wish you well in your careers. And at some point, like others before you, we ask that you also give back to this amazing program, and we hope that you've had a great experience during your either 12 or 18-month program. Thank you all, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Benedict.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. And it feels good to resume the Charles E. Frazier lecture series after hiatus last year. I would be remiss if I did not recognize and thank some of the my colleagues who are also with us. Dr. John Gaber, Department Chair for City Planning and Real Estate Development. Amy Matthews, MRED Assistant Director of Student Services, who is absolutely amazing with her hard work to help organize events like this. MRED faculty member, Dr. Stephen Buckman, Professor Emeritus, Dr. Terry Ferris, and Professor Emeritus, Dr. Barry Knox, who I think is also with us. And of course, we have the MRED students, some alumni with us, and even some future students. So we'll hear from some of them later on. As with previous Frazier lectures, we are honoring the legacy of Charles Frazier, who dramatically affected the economic vitality of South Carolina. His vision to help transform Hilton Head Island from a sparsely populated sea island into a world-class master plan community. He was truly a visionary and a pioneer in the field, a graduate of the University of Georgia with a law degree from Yale. Mr. Frazier was chairman of the 5,000-acre Sea Pines community from 1956 through 1983. He planned and initiated developments on Hilton Head Island, River Hills, on Lake Wylie near Charlotte, Kiowa Island Resort, and other communities, including active involvement in planning for Disney's new urbanist community celebration. He and his family were instrumental in founding the PGA Tournament's Heritage Classic on Sea Pines, and that started in 1969. I suspect many of you saw this tournament last week, including the enduring images of Sea Pines. Beaufort County was impoverished in the 1950s, and Charles Frazier's vision was for an environmentally oriented planned community that was at the vanguard in concert with state-of-the-art ecological planning. Sea Pines became a training ground for developers, architects, local planners, and others. He was the first recipient of the AIA Certificate of Excellence in Private Community Planning, that was 1968, and the first recipient of the ULI Citation for Excellence in Large-Scale Recreational Community Development. Unfortunately, Mr. Frazier died in a boating accident in 2002, but his legacy lives on. Clemson University established the Frazier Endowment for Community Design and Human Ecology in 1992, which was funded by friends and associates of Mr. Frazier. We are proud at Clemson to sponsor this lecture series, and I encourage you to read ULI's Leadership Legacies book, which describes Charles Frazier's substantial influence. And now I'd like to turn it over to Advancement Board Director and MRED alumni, Chandler Cox, who will introduce Mr. McNellis as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Benedict. I'm delighted to introduce John McNellis, who is joining us from Palo Alto, California. It's one of the silver linings of COVID is that we've all really delved into the technology. So been able to do things a little bit differently, and glad to have John joining us from Palo Alto. So John is a graduate of UC Berkeley and the Hastings College of Law. He practiced law until he co-founded McNellis Partners in 1982, where they are a shopping center development firm focused in Northern California. John has long been a member of the Urban Land Institute and ICSC. He's served as a ULI Governor, and I know all the students recognize his book, Making It in Real Estate, starting out as a developer, because it is required reading for them. Two of my favorite stats about John that you wouldn't find in his bio, though, is that he's the top-selling ULI author for that book. And he also has 3 of the top 5 most watched ULI videos on their YouTube channel. So it's a real treat for us to have John with us today. So thank you, John, for being with us.
Thank you, Chandler. I am going to grab the screen here, which I managed to do about half the time. Let's see if I can do this. All right, so, you know, I've given a few of these talks, and the question that always comes up, and nobody believes me. Actually, before I get into that, I want to say that I think Greenville is the prettiest small town in America, or prettiest small city. I love it. If somebody asked me later on, how is it, John, you ended up wearing all orange in the Alabama section of the national championship game a couple of years ago, and how awkward did that get when Clemson was kicking Alabama's posterior? Anyway, ask me that later. The question that keeps coming up to me is like, how do you raise the money? And I keep telling everybody, it's not really the money, it's the deal, but nobody believes me. So I'm going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll get into all the questions that you can have about raising money on your first deal. So Julia Child wrote a cookbook a long time ago. I think it was in the 60s. And the joke was, she would say, start with a clean dish. And, you know, oops, that cut out half of the readers right there. You know, they were kind of sloppy. Same thing about raising equity. Start with a good deal. That is the real base of raising money. So I'm going to talk about my first real deal, my first adult deal. So I started doing little deals, I mean, tiny deals, like a duplex when I was 24 years old. In my late 20s, I teamed up with an older partner, and I'll get into that. And by that time, I'd done a number of little deals, like $1 million and minus. But I'm going to talk about the first kind of, let's say, adult deal that I did. It was a 100,000 square foot shopping center in a town called Healdsburg. If you've been out here, you're all familiar with the Napa County. Sonoma County is one set of hills to the west. Healdsburg is now a really she wine town. And everyone thinks, oh, that's great that you have a shopping center there. But when we built this in '82, it was essentially a blue collar town about an hour north of San Francisco. Typical shopping center, it's a little bit squeezed, but this is, I'm sure you'll recognize it as, we call it a barbell shopping center. That is a large anchor at one end, in this case Safeway, and then at the time there was a drugstore at the other end, shops in between, hence the barbell, and some bank pads. We still own it today. This is a fairly recent shot. It's a nice looking center, but we're here to talk about money. Best I can recall, and it's been a while, the overall project cost $7.6 million, and we needed round numbers, $1 million in equity. A lot of money at the time, you know, hell, it's still a lot of money today. Back to that clean dish or good deal. Again, as I recall, it was roughly a 9.5% return on cost. Today, that would be a screaming deal. That'd be a killer deal. But in those days, in the early 80s, cap rates were closer to 10 than 5. At 9.5, it wasn't a bad deal. It was a good deal. What was I going to raise money for? Here's a quick summary of the limited partnership. And folks, you already know this already. Limited partnerships really haven't changed since, you know, King Tut built his tomb. Excuse me. The limited partners always get a preferred return. In those days, it was closer to 10%. Today, it would be closer because rates are down to 5%. After that, there's a 50-50 split on a true development deal, a ground up deal or major renovation. We charged 2% of hard costs, not including the land. So all in, that was about $5 million. So our fees, and my partner and I, it was about $100,000 total. Somebody asked me, well, if the construction lasts a couple of years, why not phase in the money over that couple of years? I'd say that's a big mistake. Why? Because they may not fund it later. For whatever it costs you in terms of additional preferred return on the money that's sitting in the bank, it's worth it to have that control. Highlights, I think you know this, there are no guarantees, at least in writing, to limited partners from the general partners. And in those days, it was a limited partnership. Today, it's an LLC. The name has changed, but the documents aren't any different. Limited partners don't typically have any control in a limited partnership agreement, but this is worth remembering. And even if they do have control, technically, very hard for 20 or 30 or 40 small limited partners to get together and stage a palace coup. They don't really have control. No auditing requirements in a small project like this. As it's turned out, we still own this center almost 40 years later. We send out quarterly checks in an annual newsletter and K1s once a year. Question, who is your preferred investor? And this comes up a lot, when you're trying to raise money. Is it one single really wealthy individual, an heiress or some really rich guy? Or is it a bunch of small investors, a whale or a minnow? Let's talk about the whales. And when I first thought about this, I was a little bit more in favor of the minnows, but as I think about it, here are some of the advantages. You're making one sales pitch instead of 40 or 50, or 2 or 3, assuming you land your first whale or 2. You have a much greater chance of future funding. So unless you're thinking of going one and done, I'm going to make my $1 million and then, go off to the South Seas. If you're thinking of it as a career, then having a good, successful financial partner for the long term, he can fund a lot of deals. Also, he or she could be really sophisticated. So the whale can, in effect, be your chairman of the board. You're doing the tactics, but the whale can weigh in on strategy. Should we sell this parcel or should we ground lease it? Should we finance now? Should we wait? The limited partners, the minnows, aren't going to know, and you probably don't even want their opinion on that. But having a whale can be a really valuable source of information and feedback. The downside is obvious. Unlike the limited partners, that whale is going to insist on much tougher terms. Instead of in those days 10%, 50-50, it would have probably been 12%, 70-30, or even worse. Significantly worse deals. And whales, that golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules, that applies. That whale is going to have control over the deal. So if you don't hit your benchmarks, if you miss your milestones, you might just see yourself out of a job. He may exercise his right to take you out. Minnows, painful. It's unless you want to be a Broadway actor and repeat lines over and over again. And that's exactly what I felt like. I was a bad actor in a bad off-Broadway play. It's tough making the same pitch over and over again, trying to get $25,000 a pop. Unlikely, unless your last name is Rockefeller or I guess Vanderbilt or something like that. It's unlikely that your friends and family are going to be good for more than 1 or 2 deals. You go to your fraternity brothers, your sorority sisters, the guys you play pickup ball with, and maybe they can scrap together $25,000, but they're not going to be around for the long term. Far more accounting issues if you're in this for the long term. So we had maybe 20 original partners, and maybe that's 40 now because of deaths, divorces, other things. The partners just sort of proliferate. Here's something that isn't in any book. And the virus is a perfect stepping off point for this. Now, you have some of the smartest guys in the country sitting there on this call, just top developers, Lat and Bob Hughes. And we've talked about this before, but I am firmly of the belief that it doesn't matter how good you are at real estate, sooner or later, you're going to lose money. It's just too complicated. Just think about it, folks. Anybody that started a spec office building at the end of 19, a spec apartment building here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a spec hotel, well, hell, hotels are always spec, a hotel anywhere in the world in the last year, doesn't matter whether they were Albert Einstein or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, they lost money. So the problem with having a bunch of minnows in a deal, you may not feel, you may not be technically bound to them. You may not owe them a dime under the partnership agreement, but you're going to feel a lot worse if you lose their money than some guy that's worth $1 billion. If you lose $1 million of his, he's not even going to notice it. But if you lose your friend's life savings, that's going to hurt. The real upside with the minnows, much better deal terms, much better control. So the conclusion is obvious. Stick with the minnows as long as you can. All right, so there's the background. So how do you raise your money on your first deal? How did I raise the money on my first deal? Best way to raise it is to put your own money in the deal. And then if you're looking at this as an investor, think about this. So if somebody pitches you a deal where they say, well, there's a 1% acquisition fee, there's a 1% financing fee, there's a 3% construction management fee, and it's laden with fees. One, it's hard to sell if you're the developer, and two, if you're a potential investor, you should run for the exit. If the promoter or developer is going to make $500,000, regardless of how the deal turns out, you don't want to be his or her partner. So let's say back to my deal where it was $100,000 in fees, between us, we actually invested money in the deal. Now, I think I put in $25,000 because that's all I had. Put your family's money in the deal. That helps. And that certainly convinces the other investors that you're sincere. Charging, just reversing what I just said, the fewer fees you charge, the more clear it is that the investors get their money back plus a return before you profit, the easier it is to raise money. As a somewhat humorous aside, I figured out that if an investor said, or a potential investor rather, said, gee, I'm really interested, but I want to run this past my financial advisor, just write him or her off. No financial advisor worth his salt is going to say, oh, sure, John's 28 years old, go do his first big shopping center deal. It's just not going to happen. It's just a polite way of saying no thanks. So even with the minnows, there's going to be a bigger fish, a trout, a pike, something like that. So you want to get him or her on board first. That helps everybody else feel comfortable. If you're raising $1 million, if somebody's going to go in for a couple $100,000, that's the lead to your pitch to everybody else. If you find, as I did, that you're short at the end of the day, and let's say maybe you're looking for 50,000 now, I think I was looking for 25. Don't hold to that minimum. What you do is you say, okay, guys, the four other guys on your pickup basketball team, you guys can form your own mini limited partnership. What's a $6,500 a piece or something like that, and you can collectively own one $25,000 share. And then again, if you're running out of gas raising money, going back to your big fish and say, hey, for another 50,000 or 100,000, we'll give you a little bit of our promote. And that's exactly what I did. And I'll talk about that in a moment. The pitch, you've all heard the term elevator pitch. The elevator pitch should be so simple that you don't need a New York City high rise. You ought to be able to make your pitch somewhere between the basement and the second floor. This is a good deal because we're buying this apartment building at $100,000 a door. All the other ones in the neighborhood sell at $200,000 a door. We only need to put $50,000 a door in to fix it up, and there's the profit. So you can get that out in a couple of floors. And the pitch should be pretty much that simple. As important, if not more important, as to how you're going to make money this is how you're not going to lose money. Yeah, again, back to the point that sooner or later, everybody loses money in real estate. If you're talking to investors who've been around the hoop for a while, chances are they've lost money. So if you say to them, and let's use my deal as an example. If you say to them, it's a 100,000 foot center, we've got Safeway pre-signed, and we've got the drugstore pre-signed, and we have Wells Fargo pre-signed, and that brings us to break even. Sure, we've got 30,000 feet of shops left to go, but your money's safe. I can't guarantee you're going to make money, but look, there's no way we're going to lose money. That is a really good way to sell. And again, you're going to make your preferred return before I make any money. I put my life savings in the deal. I even managed to talk my poor old mother out of a few bucks to put in the deal. And then when you're young, like you all are, and starting out, very hard to sell your own expertise. Why? Because you don't have any. It's hard borrowing $10 million without any gray hair. So I was a young lawyer at the time. I had an older client, about 15 years older. I could pitch him. I could say, this is a great deal, and my partner is absolutely killer shopping center developer. So on this deal, I probably made about 50 pitches, and I really got tired of hearing myself talk. Selling my partner's expertise, I did manage to, I think I robbed my IRA account to put $25,000 in the deal. My mother wouldn't loan me any money, and not that she had much, but she insisted that she wanted to be a partner in the deal, which was kind of cute. And then we got stuck. Let's say we were at 850,000 and I needed $1 million. I was getting to the end of the deal. One guy, one pretty wealthy guy, was already in for 200,000. So I went to him and I said, what's it going to take for you to put up another 150,000? And remember that 50-50 split, we gave him, on top of his limited partner share, we gave him another 20% of our share. So it went 50 to the limiteds, 10% to him, 40% to us at the end of the day. But we got the deal done. And at the end of the day, getting the deal done on whatever terms is far more important than holding out for your hope for original return. That's kind of it on raising money. Like Chandler said, the ULI has been great that they've filmed my talks over the last half a dozen years. If you'd like to, you can check these things out. They're all on YouTube. Particularly useful if you're having trouble sleeping at night. And then finally, if I can ask a favor, if you have time, if you like the book, if you don't, please post a review on Amazon. Actually, we're getting close to the 100 reviews. The first edition came out and it was well received and well reviewed, but the way Amazon works, you start all over again. So very much appreciate your reviews. And that, folks, is it. I am now ready to try to answer every question you can come up with.
Are we getting called on, or are we just going, Dr. Benedict?
No, let's do this. First, let me thank John. His comments were very relevant to some of the current courses you guys are taking right now. And I know some of you are very entrepreneurial, where you want to be doing your own deal soon. So great information. So yeah, we're going to open it up for questions now. And let's start with the students first, because I know some of you have been already talking about what questions you like to ask. So let's start it off. Gentlemen, who would like to go first? Or ladies?
I'll jump in there.
Okay, John.
All right. Hey, John. My name's John, also from North Carolina. Appreciate you joining us today. Got your first edition right here. So I look forward to reading the second one. So my question is, it comes from your book, but I'll try to relate it to your presentation. From a first deal perspective, it probably doesn't make sense to go outside of your rule, or to break your rule of going outside of the 2-hour drive time. But today, with where your career is, especially with technology and Zoom and VR and drones, do you ever break your own rule and go outside of the 2-hour drive time and do a deal outside of your geographical area? Like, would you do a deal outside of the state of California, for example?
That's a great question. I probably wouldn't do a development deal, John, but the farther away I am from home, we did in the last couple of years, we bought a little shopping center in Portland, which is Portland, Oregon, a couple-hour flight from here. But it was just, the buildings were done, one was empty, it was just a lease-up play. So I went up and took a look at it, great location, and I said, yeah, this is the kind of risk I can do. But would I do like this Healdsburg deal in the Carolinas? No. You read the book. There are plenty of guys smarter than I am, and several of them are here in this virtual room, sitting there in the Carolinas. So I would not do that. All of our development deals to this day are still within that 2-hour drive.
Great, thanks.
Good.
Sure.
Who else? Students?
Yep. I'll go next. Good afternoon, John. Obviously, thank you for coming here. That comment you made about Alabama kind of hit close to home, since I went there for undergrad, but ironically ended up at Clemson. My question for you is, what are some of the nuances of your due diligence process that has kind of either kept you from losing money or completely losing the deal?
Nuances of the due diligence process. The good part about being in retail, and it takes a while to get there because it's very much a relationship, as opposed to pretty much all the other disciplines, office, industrial, and so on. We deal with the same people over and over again. I've been dealing with the same people at Safeway for 30 years, same people at Walmart since 1992. So I kind of, in terms of due diligence, Brian, I kind of rely, they say, hey, John, we want to go into Modesto, say, or Stockton. And I say, okay, how about this corner? Yeah, we like that corner. So I kind of rely on them in terms of the economic due diligence. I said, if it works for them, that's good enough for me. We don't second guess it. Where the due diligence that we have to do is to make sure that we can get the zoning or the permits that we need. And also that we don't get stuck on environmental. And I guess we're careful enough on that. But I am not known for micromanaging the due diligence process. That kind of gets in the way of closing deals.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I have one. Hi, Mick. This is Maher Al-Kanhal. I'm an international student from Middle East, Saudi Arabia. My question here, I know that California attract many investor or international investor around the world. Which sector do you see hitting the most, and why do you think international investor hit the California market?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Did you say which sector is hurting the most?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, right now in California, I think it's temporary, but it's the hotels. I'm pretty sure are, or at least have been, and to this point have been hurting the most. I think longer term, office is going to be struggling, particularly central business district office. Pretty much. Industrial is on fire across the country. You all know this. You can't touch industrial anywhere, but retail is there might be 6 or 7 discrete retail categories, from super regional malls all the way down to strip centers. So the class B enclosed malls are the ones that are causing or have the most heartache right now in California, and as far as I can tell, everywhere else. But the other retail categories are actually doing okay. Our portfolio is mostly retail. We have some office and some residential. But for the longer term, I think I'd be most worried about office right now in California. That would be a good question for, say, Lat, for Charlotte. If we can make this, where's Lat? There he is. How's Charlotte looking for office right now?
Well, the CBD, because we're so heavily finance oriented with Bank of America and all the players, and anticipated shrinkage in their needs as it relates to working remote to some degree as we try to figure that out. Downtown Charlotte's still hurting pretty significantly. If you go into the immediate areas surrounding downtown, like South End, it's gotten really hot. I mean, buildings are leasing up very quickly. Surprisingly, even some of the 8 to 10-story buildings are leasing up quickly with the complication of elevators and all that on the remote. But that is the walkable, creative area. South Park is picking up, but much more slowly. So probably like you, I think we're going to see the downtown struggle. We're going to see the office product change in the suburbs as we figure out how to do this remote thing. So it's going to be a risky asset for a little bit to come, in our opinion.
I agree. Does that answer your question, Maher?
Yes, thank you very much.
Hey, folks, do me a favor. It's tricky doing these Zoom calls. If I can see you, it's easier. So unless you're in the shower or something, I'd sure appreciate it if you turn your cameras on, so I'm just not staring at names. Next question, please.
Yeah, I'll go. Hey, John, I appreciate you doing this. My name's Jeremy Grab. My question's in regards to business partners or teammates you've had throughout your career, and what was the biggest failure or mistake, whether it's recurring or an isolated incident that you've seen from a partner or teammates or coworkers, if you can bring that to memory, or even a personal one that, and what you learned from all those things.
Yeah, another great question. There are multiple kinds of partners, right? There are financial partners, and you know, I've talked about that at length. And then you have operating partners that you work with. My 2 operating partners, Beth Walter and Mike Powers, have been with me since 1983. So hell, 38 years, and they're great. Well, one of them runs the company and does all the financial, he's the Harvard MBA, does all the financial reporting and takes care of the banks. The other one handles all the construction and all the property management, and, you know, leaves me free to go to conferences. They've been great. Financial partners have been, just to go off on a tangent here, something that, again, I started with no money, and I started doing with family and friends. We quickly ran, just like I suggested, we ran out of family and friends money right away, but we started in the early 80s. And if you're a student of real estate history, which I don't suggest you should be, then President Reagan changed the savings and loan laws. In those days, savings and loans, the only thing they could do was make home loans. It was a safe, solid industry. But Reagan deregulated that, and suddenly the savings and loan industry went crazy, and they were funding everything under the sun in real estate. So somebody should ask me, what's the worst deal you've ever done, John? Well, I'll go back to 1983. Shortly after we built this shopping center, we teamed up with one of those wild savings and loans. It's called Guardian Savings out of Houston, Texas. And that partner, we bought a center for $15.5 million in those, so whatever that is in today's dollars, a lot of money for us, a 300,000 foot center. And we financed the son of a gun 103%. That is, they put up all the money and we actually got fees out of the deal. And so what's the best way to lose money in real estate? Over leverage. And it's exactly what we did with this. The second best way to lose money, and we made this mistake too, my partner, who was older, like 15 years older, and he knew what he was doing. He was convinced that we should take this center, which was in a great location in Sacramento, and convert an open air center into an enclosed mall and bring in Nordstrom. Nordstrom at the time was the belle of the ball. everybody from here to Charlotte wanted Nordstrom. And in order to bring them to your center, you had to give them the land, build them their store, do all of their tenant improvements and fixtures, and then give them their first turn of inventory, and then almost no rent, and then you'd make money with everybody else. Well, anyway, we spent too many years, too much time trying to do this enclosed mall idea. You know that old saw, if at first you don't succeed, try again. I don't love that one. If at first you don't succeed, take a deep breath, think about it, and pivot. What we should have done was redo that center on an open air basis. Anyway, we had a number of partners in the 80s, financial partners, and at the end of the day, which was the depth of the Bob and Ladd, I'd be curious if, and Dave, if you guys, I still think, despite how bad it's been this last year, I think the '92 recession was the worst for real estate. I'd be curious, Bob, you must be sitting there with the rest of those guys. I'd be curious to see whether you agree, but we came out of that thinking no more financial partners. So I like operating partners, financial partners, no. Mr. Hughes, you want to opine? I'm curious to see whether you agree.
I agree with you that the rest of the world had a recession, real estate had a depression in the 90s.
Yeah, that was tough. Okay. Here, I have a kind of a trick question for you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let's open it up to everybody, not just students. But go ahead, John. Why don't you go ahead and pose a question for the students and everybody.
Are you breaking up there? So my question, I was thinking about this as I was coming to work today to talk with you guys. Yeah. Let's say each of you, if you were to win the lottery, how much would it take for you to win in order to say, okay, I'm not going to work anymore. I don't want to be a developer. Think about that. Is there a number? And then the trick part of it is, I think if you're really meant to be a developer, it doesn't matter whether you win $1 million or 100 million. You still want to do it because it's not about the money. It's real estate's fun. If you're meant to do it. I know my friends, we all love doing it. And it doesn't matter how much money you have because we're not in it for that. Okay, questions?
Well, hi, thank you so much, John. My name is Daniel Fallas from Costa Rica. You have said vacancy is the biggest risk in real estate. Do you have a specific strategy to address vacancy in the future deals under the current situations?
So just to repeat your question, I'm pointing out vacancy is the biggest risk. And so what's our strategy? Well, our main strategy is really pretty simple, Daniel. We do not build spec. We just finished a shopping center. Actually, we had the grand opening last week. It was dirt we bought about 8 years ago, and it's in a little town you've never heard of here in the Bay Area. But we didn't start construction on it until it was 100% pre-leased. The other way, the one reason that I like, and people say, what discipline, which type of real estate should I start in? I almost always say start in residential, because California, at least, my 2-hour drive, the area that I know, until this last year, we had a residential vacancy factor forever of 0. So you could have construction cost overruns, you could have interest rate risk, you could have all kinds of risk, but you wouldn't have a vacancy risk. Not true with any other discipline, retail, office, and so on. They all have vacancy. So we don't do as many deals as a lot of people, but we don't build spec. Again, I've got friends who up and down the 101 corridor from where I sit to San Francisco, who are building these major projects that they're getting slaughtered on right now because apartments at the moment, we have very high apartment vacancies here in the Bay Area. I'm sure you've read this. Everybody's fleeing. I gave a talk to a group in Texas, And before I got started, I just said, I'd like to say hello to all my friends from California that moved to Texas. There is some truth to that. So anyway, that's it. We don't build spec, and we try to at least be pre-leased, just like that deal 40 years ago in Healdsburg. We try to be pre-leased to break even.
John, this is Ladd. I'm just curious on that deal that you held for 8 years before you started. How much of that was getting it entitled and permits so you could start construction? How long did that take?
Great question. No, we typically don't buy let me back up a little bit on that. I don't like to buy raw land unless I'm going to do something with it immediately. But this was at the intersection of two significant freeways. It truly was the corner of kind of no-brainer. It was this brilliant piece that had gone into foreclosure in the 2009 recession. We bought it from the bank for about $3 million in 2012, just as it was coming out. So part of the delay was I didn't have a plan for it initially. I just knew it was a great piece of property. And then the next part was I knew the right tenant for it was Safeway, the supermarket chain. At the time, Safeway had its own development company, and they were tied up on an inferior site. And so then I was chasing around trying to get replacement or different tenants for the site. That took a couple of years. We caught a break. Safeway was bought by Albertsons. The first thing Albertsons did was disband the development part of the Safeway organization. So once they were no longer developers, they said, oh, okay, now we're your tenant because you have the better site. So it took a few years to line up the right tenant. And then, even though it was a small town, the zoning was tricky. I went through the usual coffee and donuts, with the neighbors a bunch of times, and the architectural review committee, planning commission, city council. That took a few years. And then I think we got it entitled in 17 or 18. And then Albertsons was kind of on hard times. Things got a little tricky for them. And so we had a lease signed with them, but they put the whole project on hold. And then we started construction, and boom, the COVID slowed. We were supposed to have opened this center last Thanksgiving, and then COVID happened, supply chain, we had steel shortages and so on. So it was delayed quite a lot. Bob Hughes made a great point in a conversation that we jointly gave some years back, where he said, never borrow money to buy raw land. And if you want a great takeaway for today, you get a tattoo that says, don't borrow money, don't use borrowed money, because we paid all cash for it. So sure, we should have imputed a rate of return, on the dirt for those 8.5 years, but we didn't. Much easier to survive, without debt.
So I've got a question for you. Hey, John, my name is Nicholas Long. Again, appreciate you being here. So as far as build to suit development goes, how do you go about building up your client base, and networking with the people that are going to be in those spaces that you're building for? And are you recommending that your first try to development should be trying to find someone to build something for?
So build to suit, to my mind, that calls office or retail. Retail, you've just got to get. If you're going to go into retail, you should go to work for a company that specializes in retail and has done it for a long time. It takes a number of years to develop the relationships that you need. Like I mentioned, I've got 40-year relationship with Safeway, almost 30 with Walmart. It takes a while. It's so that you're kind of effectively doing build to suit, even if you're not. Office, I'm not so sure of. And then of course, residential, there is no build to suit. So I think whichever discipline you pick to get into, you just need to get in there for a while. It's not, you can't do a build to suit right away because no one's going to trust you right away to build something for them. You got to work your way up to that, I think.
Great. Yeah, I was referring to retail. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, okay, retail, what you do, you focus in on that. You know, the young retail developers who they want to do deals with 7-Eleven, you know, the Dollar General, the little guys that are on a 1 acre piece or a 2 acre piece, that you know, the bigger developers don't want to fool around with. Now I say that, folks, but we did a 23 acre center, a super Walmart project where we sold off 18 acres to Walmart. We had some pads left over. So my joke this year is I am the Benjamin Button of developers. You know, I'm pushing 70 years old and I'm doing my first 7-Eleven deal. But those are hard to do, you know, at least in California, because nobody likes them. You know, but we're under construction with it. So if retail, you want to go, and there are, I'm sure they're in the Carolinas the same way they're here. There are little tenants. We have one called Dutch Bros, which is a drive-through coffee. It's a couple 100-foot drive-through thing, but they kill it. That's the kind of tenant you can go to. If you're going to go into retail, you guys probably already know this. First thing you do when you graduate, if you're not already in ULI, you join ULI and you stay in forever. And then whichever discipline you pick, if it's office, you join NAIOP. If it's retail, you join ICSC, and that's where you make the connections. So if I were you and I said, you know, I want to be a retail developer for a little tenant, I would fly to Vegas, you know, when the meetings open again, and go see them and say, hey, I want to be your guy in you know, the greater Greenville area. And here are the sites. You know, that's how you go about doing it.
John, let me pose a question, and you know, if you could draw from what your friends are saying too, with what's happening with the increase in construction costs everywhere, which has become a crisis, and then you throw in the long due diligence period, especially in California. What have you done in an instance where the rents don't pencil out? Maybe you've already negotiated a deal with some of your credit retailers. Have you been forced to go back and try to work out a new structure to the deal with them?
Yeah, I've never tried. That would seem to me, Robert, a waste of time. They would say, yeah, too bad, John, pound salt. No, trying to renegotiate with them. No, it's a good point. You know, sometimes at the end of the day, you know, just as you pointed out, construction costs go up, delays go on, and you're in the deal for too much money, and you sell. You know, you just there isn't enough left in it, which is why, you know, you want to, you know, the merchant builders, they in fact, I just heard about a deal. Albertsons was selling off a couple of its parcels in Boise, Idaho. This just occurred in the last couple of weeks, and they put it out to bid. And this pretty significant deal, $40 million. They put it out to bid to developers such as ourselves, and the winning bid. And so the idea is we Albertsons will sell it to you, and then we'll lease back our piece. But the bids were like at 100 basis points, you know, over what they thought that the sale cap would be. So that's where you would get killed on that scenario, Robert. Where you just don't have enough leeway if construction costs, which they are going up here quite a bit. Lumber is an issue right now. I guess that's a nationwide issue. But if you don't have enough leeway in there to withstand that, then you're stuck, and all you can do is feed it.
Yeah. No, thank you. Good answer.
Oh, sure.
Hey, John. My name is Andrew Hall. Thank you for joining us today. My question regards a recent post you had on LinkedIn called Retail 1 Year Later. And you touch on how discount stores like Marshall's and TJ Maxx did much better throughout the pandemic than some of the larger ones like Sears and Macy's. And you kind of hint at how the larger ones were mismanaged. My question is to you, how exactly were the larger ones mismanaged? And do you think they will ever recover from the struggles they've had through the pandemic?
To answer your last question first, no. I think Kmart, Sears, Penny, they were already on their way out. I think what happened was being a successful retailer, particularly a successful soft goods retailer, you have to be in touch with your customer base. So you guys must have, with your mothers or fathers, walked into one of those stores and you look around and you say, gee, there's nothing here I want. The management got old. They lost touch. They did not reinvest. They didn't hire, sharp, buyers and designers. Kmart has been circling the drain. I don't know, 25 years. Other gray-haired fellows just weigh in, but no, I don't think they'll recover. This recession, it's totally, each one is different, but this one has in common with the last one, 2008, 2009. It's hitting hardest at the middle. The rich will always be rich. So Louis Vuitton, the rich people will pretend to be broke for a little while, but they get bored with that. And then they'll go back to buying, Ferragamo, Louis Vuitton and whatnot. That the high end is always going to be okay. The players will change. The low end, the Dollar Generals, Dollar Trees, 99-cent, anything with $1 in it, those are really killing it. It's the middle that gets hollowed out, by these recessions. And as the income disparity increases, a lot of the middle is trending downward. So Ross, Marshalls, TJ Maxx, those are all very well-run companies. If you want to be a retail developer, they're also very difficult companies, by the way, to deal with as a developer. But in fact, I can remember arguing with Ross years ago because over pennies, and they said, look, John, if you want to make money with our company, buy the stock. I said, yeah, that's probably good advice because I sure as hell ain't making it on this shopping center deal. Anyway, that's really it. I have no hope for those enclosed kind of middle market malls that are anchored by tenants like that.
Hey, John, thanks for being here. My name is Madeline.
Yes, please.
Hey, in another one of your articles, you talked about a new data collection platform called Placer AI. I was wondering, how have you stayed ahead of the curve in discovering these new technologies and assessing which one is worth investing in?
Yeah, that's very kind of you. I have a little bronze of a T-Rex dinosaur out in our reception area. And I keep it there to remind myself that I'm like this nearly extinct predator. So I am not keeping ahead of the curve. But, what happened, I wrote another article earlier on that one about how the banks were redlining retail, that they had thrown the baby out with the bath, so to speak. And, earlier, a little while ago, I mentioned there were 6 or 7 discrete categories of retail. Well, too many of the banks were just absolutely saying all retail is out. My particular niche, which is supermarket anchored neighborhood open air centers, was great, is great. In fact, another joke, I didn't realize I was in the essential retail business until this whole mess started a year ago. So anyway, I wrote that piece about, complaining about the banks having written us all off. And a very smart banker from Wells Fargo called me and said, hey, John, here's what we do. We use Placer, so we go in for a loan and we say, this is a great shopping center. The smart guys at the banks, they use Placer to do their own analysis of sales volumes. That's how I heard about it. And then I jumped on that bandwagon. I think I don't know if you saw the follow-up on that article, but Placer isn't quite the magic bullet that I thought it was. It's a useful tool, but it's much more useful to the retailers themselves because they have their own numbers that they can triangulate against. And for a developer to use Placer, it's a little trickier because Placer can be off by an order of magnitude. But anyway, But the way to stay in touch really is to back to my earlier advice, join the trade organizations, go to the meetings, listen to what everybody's saying. And, when you finish, the education never stops. You guys are all top flight, obviously, to be at Clemson, but you join ULI and you spend a lot of time with your chapter, you join NAIOP, and you learn that way.
Absolutely.
Kind of springboarding on that, I'm just curious, with this idea of focusing your interest in a specific area, that 2-hour region, and communicating with people through ULI and these organizations across the country. Can you talk about maybe a time where you picked up on a trend that was happening on the other side of the country that maybe you brought into your work?
What a softball question. I love this. Okay, so, and Lat will know. So about 20 years ago, I'm sitting in a ULI session. Mr. Purser here gets up and gives a presentation about, was it a closed Publix? Anyway, he gives this presentation how he took a closed supermarket that there was no retail use for, turned the building itself into air-conditioned self-storage. And because self-storage doesn't need any parking, right? And whereas it's 4-to-1 land to building in a retail setting, you could also turn the parking lot into self-storage. And I'm sitting there and I say, son of a bitch, that is a great idea. So that I took that idea back and I stole it from Lat. And then I kept telling people in Northern California, find me an old building that and of course I didn't say why. So there was a competitor to Home Depot, which no longer exists, called Home Base. And I just took Lat's play and got into it. And then of course I decided, nope, self-storage, it was a separate business. It's kind of like a quasi hotel business. So we ended up flipping. I thought it was too complicated, but we tied it up and we flipped this building for maybe, and we never flip anything, but I just got scared. But we made, let's say $100,000. But I figured at the time that paid for all of my ULI forever. Just going, remember that, Lat?
Well, it's amazing how necessity yields creativity sometimes.
Yeah, but again, this is why you join the trade organizations, because, and the other good part about it is that the guys in the Carolinas are going to be a lot more forthright with somebody in California and vice versa than somebody in their own backyard, right? Because you're not going to give your trade secrets away to someone that's going to compete against you across the street. But McNellis is in Palo Alto and he's lazy. And he's not going more than 2 hours away. So if we tip him to a little of the secret sauce, what's the harm? Another reason to go national on this stuff.
Okay. All righty. Well, anybody else with any last questions?
So let me just tell you the Clemson story. So 4 years ago, I spoke to your predecessors and had a really pleasant time. And so I'm fond of Clemson. It just so happens that Clemson's colors are the same as the San Francisco Giants, right? Bright orange. I have a very good friend whose daughter is the CAO of the 49ers, gives us tickets to the Clemson Alabama game. And I say, that's great. I love Clemson. So I dress up head to toe in orange, right? Because it says Giants on it, but it's the right color. It doesn't occur to me that, half the tickets are Alabama and half are Clemson. And so then I pop out of the entryway to turn up to my seats and all I see are red. And I'm the only orange sweatshirt in the whole place. And I get up there and you guys may recall that Lawrence just sort of carved up Alabama. And it was just like the worst embarrassment for Alabama ever. And there was some drinking going on in the stands, and the Alabama people were getting more and more upset. And then, of course, by the time the guy in front of me left, he flipped me. He gave me the double flip off. I said, oops, I'm on the wrong side here. Guys, any further questions? I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, John, I've got a question for you. My name is McKay Brabham, and I'm from Columbus, South Carolina. Thank you for coming to speak with us.
Oh, sure.
Of course. I was just curious, like the retailers that you typically work with, over the past few years, have their square footage needs been decreasing as people try to shift more from like a distribution facility and stores are used more just to try something on?
Great question. The answer, again, we are mostly supermarkets, drugstores, and personal services and drive-throughs. So ours, not so much, but that's definitely a trend. If you have a larger center, a power center, or a community center, or a mall, do you folks have Burlington Coat, for example, in the East Coast?
We do.
I see some nods, yeah. So Burlington Coat, it was at 80,000 feet, on this point in the old days. And then they came, and we have one center where we have a Burlington Coat, a larger center. And they said, oh, we've right-sized to 40,000 feet. That's happening all the time. Old days, if I wanted to get a size 17 shirt, I'd walk into a store and there'd be 200 of them. Now, I walk in and there's 2 of them. I say, I'll buy it, and I want 3 more. Well, we'll have those to you tomorrow, on the internet. So there's no question that for the soft goods retailers, particularly the footprints are shrinking. And that's a problem, because then how do you backfill? In the Burlington case, you got 40,000 feet that you need to take back and deal with. It's just something we have to deal with in the business.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, Lad, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you thank John and offer some concluding remarks. So,
well, I think the first thing that John's mentioned several times is that the common denominator between a lot of us is the Urban Land Institute. And, Bob Hughes and I may have met a few times before I joined the ULI, but since then we see each other 5, 6, 7 times a year. And John's right. It's easier to share secrets with somebody 3,000 miles away. But I will also say that with people close like Bob and I, we'll share a lot with each other. So I do encourage, when you get out into your career, find a way to join the ULI. You'll make lifetime friendships there. With that, John started writing his books, and as you can tell, he's a very entertaining writer. It'll be interesting if you read the books, which I imagine you will, because you get tested on them. But keep them, and in 20 years, read them again and see if you really did pay attention to some of the lessons that he put forth in the book, because you're getting to learn the lessons that John learned without having the hard knocks. And John and Bob are very smart developers, but mainly that means that we all ran into hard times, difficult situations, hard knocks, and you learn from those difficult situations. So it's been a pleasure knowing John and Bob and all that all these years. And I will say that John is really a well-known real estate professional and writer across the entire United States. I have been in the Rockies, and a conversation comes up and people go, do you know John McNellis? I'm like, whoa, how did that happen? Then I'm in Hickory, North Carolina, talking to a cowboy who's a developer. And he goes, do you know John McNellis? I'm like, well, I have 2 copies of his book. He said, can you get one autographed for me? So I called John and I get it autographed. And then 2 weeks ago, I'm in Waynesville, North Carolina, Asheville. And a guy, we're talking, and he's from California. He says, do you know John McNellis? I'm like, this is crazy. What are the odds of this? So John's writing and his insight into real estate is very, very valuable. And John, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to the Clemson students, to talk to Bob and I and Dave and the whole team. And Bob, I'd like to see if you have anything to add, because you probably know more stories on John than I do.
Yeah, I probably do, Lance, but I'm not going to tell them.
I said if we go drinking, we'll talk about them.
I think one thing everybody's learned here today is every real estate developer talks about how the other guy is smarter. So that's a tool you need to take forward. I agree completely that ULI was the best organization I ever joined in my career. And the kind of knowledge you exchange, it's not exactly your trade secret. It's just sort of the way you approach stuff. And the guys who approach it with a long-term view, like John said, it doesn't matter how much money. My wife, who's sitting right over my shoulder, says, when are you going to retire? I can't. This is what I do for money. Not for money. And John, I have a question, John. Did you get a haircut?
No, he dyed his hair gray.
It's gone. Where is it?
No, actually, I am in my full cochise mode. I haven't had a haircut in over a year. It is so long that it's, I pull it really tight and it's in a bun, but it's about down to here.
It's long enough to pull back, huh? So, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just, yeah. So I look clean cut from the front only.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, the other thing, as you can tell, we are great friends. You'll find, like, I've been married for over 40 years. I have 4 kids, and I love them all, but they're not the least bit interested in business. And a lot of my other friends, they're not interested in business. But so ULI with Bob and Lat are great examples. They are close friends. We have such similar interests. It's fun to share stuff with guys that have the same interests, and you can commiserate with, and you can brag a little bit, moan a little bit, that is fun. And a lot of what's in my book, I learned from these 2 guys and the others at ULI. I basically just took notes from the smarter guys and said, yeah, okay, this makes sense.
That's a point I actually wanted to make earlier. You were talking about when to read John's book. I've just read John's book again. I don't think there's any point in your career where reading John's book wouldn't come in handy. It reinforces things you believe. It reminds you of things you forgot, and some of it but the next time you read it, all those things are going to change. Some of it that you forgot. And so it's a great way to touch base with all the principles and ways to approach them. I mean, I don't do them all exactly like John says. And I don't think John would say, follow my book exactly and you're going to have a great career. Read my book, follow the principles, these are the lessons, and you can have a great career in this if you love it. I mean, you got to love it before you read the book.
Before I forget, so see this book's called The Psychology of Money. Everybody see that?
Yep.
So one of my mentees sent it to me just recently. I read it. It's not about real estate. It's written by a very smart business journalist who's interested in the stock market. But because everything in here is exactly what I agree with, I think he's a genius. He did, but very useful read if you're starting out in business, because he talks about Warren Buffett in particular. He says, Buffett isn't the best investor ever. There are other guys who, for the course of their career, outperformed him on an annual return basis. Buffett's just been in the damn business for 70 years. He started when he was 15 and now he's 85. So what this guy talks about is saving money, taking the long-term view, which is just exactly what Lat, Bob, and I do in real estate, and just staying in the game and being cautious. Anyway, it's a great read. It's almost a beach read. I'm not sure the guy is a brilliant businessman himself, but he kind of sums up a lot of basic principles or how to look at things that I really would recommend. If you've got time to read another book, Psychology of Money, and the guy's name is Housel, Housel.
Thanks, John.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the kind words.
And John, hopefully you'll get to meet all of our students this coming fall at the ULI meeting in Chicago, if it's in
Yeah,
person.
you know, I love it. I hope you guys come, and I'll be there, and it's always just come up and say hello. I always get a kick out of that. Yeah, I will definitely be there, and it feels to me like the virus is winding down here, and I'm, you know, you got to be an optimist to be in our business, but I think things will be back. So I look forward to seeing you all.
Okay. Well, very good. And thank you so much for being with us tonight, John.
It's fun. Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And with that, we'll conclude the Fraser Lecture Series for 2021. So thanks, everybody.
Well done, and thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, everybody.